Lesson 2. Once there was a king. It was raining, and I was in no mood to study. So, as soon as I saw my maths tutor coming with an umbrella, I ran to my mother and said, "Mama, I am having an acute headache and I do not want to study today." The servant entered the room and declared the arrival of the tutor. Mother looked at me and asked the servant to send him back. Mother went out, and after a minute, I went to my grandmother and said, "Granny, do tell me a story." I had to ask this many times. Granny went on reading her book and took no notice. At last, Granny said to me, "Child, don't bother me. Wait till I have finished my book." But I persisted. "Granny, do tell me a story." At last, Granny put down the book and said, "Okay, let us begin." As soon as Granny agreed, I rushed and held her hand and started dancing with delight, dragged her inside my mosquito net on the bed. I clutched hold of the bolster with both hands in my excitement and jumped up and down with joy. And when I got little quieter, said, "Now, Granny, let's have the story." Granny went on. Once there was a king, and the king had a queen. That was good to begin with. He had only one queen. It is usual for kings in fairy stories to be extravagant in queens, and whenever we hear that there are two queens, our hearts begin to sink. One is sure to be unhappy. But in Granny's story, that danger was past. He had only one queen. We next hear that the king had not got any son. Next, we hear that the king has gone away into the forest for tapasya in order to get a son. There was only one thing that would have made me go into the forest, and that was to get away from my tutor. But the king left his queen and a small girl behind. The girl grew up into a beautiful princess. 12 years passed away, and the king goes on practicing tapasya and never thinks about of his beautiful daughter. The princess had reached the full bloom of her youth. The age of marriage had passed, but the king does not return. And the queen pines away with grief and cries, "Is my golden daughter destined to die unmarried? Oh, me, what a fate is mine!" Then the queen sent men to the king to request him earnestly to come back for a single night and take one meal in the palace, and the king consented. The queen cooked with her own hands and with the greatest care 64 dishes and made a seat for him of sandalwood and arranged the food in plates of gold and cups of silver. The princess stood behind with the peacock tail fan in her hand. The king, after 12 years' absence, came into the house, and the princess waved the fan, lighting up all the room with her beauty. The king looked in his daughter's face and forgot to take his food. At last, he asked his queen, "Dear, who is this girl whose beauty shines as the gold image of the goddess? Whose daughter is she?" The queen beat her forehead and cried, "Oh, how evil is my fate! Don't you know your own daughter?" The king was struck with amazement. He said at last, "My tiny daughter has grown to be a woman." "What else?" the queen said with a sigh. "Don't you know that 12 years have passed by?" "But why didn't you get her married?" asked the king. "You were away," the queen said, "and how could I find her a suitable husband?" The king declared with excitement, "The first man I see tomorrow," he said, "when I come out of the palace, shall marry her." The princess went on waving her fan of peacock feathers, and the king finished his meal. The next morning, as the king came out of his palace, he saw the son of a Brahman gathering sticks in the forest outside the palace gate. His age was about 7 or 8. The king said, "I will marry my daughter to him." Who can interfere with the king's command? At once, the boy was called, and the marriage garlands were exchanged between him and the princess. At this point, I came up close to my wise granny and asked her eagerly, "What then?" In bottom of my heart, there was a devout wish to substitute myself for that fortunate wood gatherer of 7 years old. The night was rainy. The earthen lamp by my bedside was burning low. My grandmother's voice droned on as she told the story, and all these things served to create in a corner of my heart the belief that I had been gathering sticks in the dawn of some indefinite time in the kingdom of some unknown king, and in a moment garlands had been exchanged between me and the princess. Beautiful as the goddess of grace, she had a gold band on her hair and gold earrings in her ears. She had a necklace and bracelets of gold and a golden waist chain around her waist, and a pair of golden anklets tinkled above her feet. With joy and delight, I asked Granny, "What then?" Granny went on, "Then the princess took her little husband away in great distress and built a huge palace with 7 wings and began to cherish her husband with great care. I jumped up and down in my bed and clutched at the bolster more tightly than ever and said, 'What then?'" Granny continued, "The little boy went to school and learnt many lessons from his teachers, and as he grew up, his class fellows began to ask him, 'Who is that beautiful lady who lives with you in the palace with the 7 wings?' The Brahman's son was eager to know who she was. He could only remember how one day he had been gathering sticks and a great disturbance arose. But all that was so long ago that he had no clear recollection. 4 or 5 years passed in this way. His companions always asked him, 'Who is that beautiful lady in the palace with the 7 wings?' And the Brahman's son would come back from school and sadly tell the princess, 'Tell me, oh tell me, who are you?' The princess said, 'Let it pass today. I will tell you some other day.' And every day the Brahman's son would ask, 'Who are you?' And the princess would reply, 'Let it pass today. I will tell you some other day.' In this manner, 4 or 5 more years passed away. At last, the Brahman's son became very impatient and said, 'If you will not tell me today who you are, O beautiful lady, I will leave this palace with the 7 wings.' Then the princess said, 'I will certainly tell you tomorrow.' Next day, the Brahman's son, as soon as he came home from school, said, 'Now tell me who you are.' The princess said, 'Tonight I will tell you after supper when you are in bed.' The Brahman's son said, 'Very well,' and he began to count the hours in expectation of the night. That evening, her husband, the Brahman's son, had finished his meal, too excited to eat, and had gone to the golden bed in the bedchamber. He said to himself, 'Tonight I shall surely know who this beautiful lady is in the palace with the 7 wings.' The princess took her food and slowly entered the bedchamber. She had to answer that night the question, and as she went up to the bed to tell him, she found a serpent had crept out of the bed and had bitten the Brahman's son. Her boy husband was lying on the bed with pale face in death. My heart suddenly stopped to throb, and I asked with a choking voice, 'What then?' Granny said, 'Then.' But what is the use of going on any further with the story? It would only lead on to what was more and more impossible. The boy of 7 did not know that how impossible it was to become alive again after death. No grandson of a grandmother could tell us all about it. But my faith never admits defeat, and it would snatch away the life from death itself to turn him back. It would be outrageous for him to think that such a story of one teacherless evening could so suddenly come to a stop. Therefore, the grandmother had to call back her story from the ever-shut chamber of the great end. But she does it so simply. It was merely by floating the dead body on a banana stem on the river and having some mantras read by a magician. But in that rainy night, and in the dim light of a lamp, death loses all its horror in the mind of the boy and seems nothing more than a deep slumber of a single night. When the story ends, The tired eyelids are weighed down with sleep. Next morning, I found my mother shaking me to get up for school. And the prince became alive, not to meet the beautiful princess, but to take up the bag and go to school to learn the realities of life. Rabindranath Tagore.